It's the LIA Cast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, take on a topic, look at it from every conceivable angle, then talk about applications of that topic, how to put it in use, maybe get a little helpy tip out of the deal. And my name is Jersey Joe's cartoonist and teaching artist. That other guy is...
Hey, I'm Rob Stenzinger, designer and coder, and I like how you describe this show. We like to think hard about something that's like creative and fascinating, and be theoretical and practical and come out of it
and
alive.
Yeah, the tagline we put on our Patreon is we think hard about visual storytelling, so you will too. So, hey Rob, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Jersey. I am pretty stoked about our topic today, and I know normally, and what we will do today is, like, before we jump right into that, because we need to stretch out and make sure we're ready to push ourselves, and we like to do a bit of a warm up that we call a curveball, and I know that'll happen before our main topic today, which is looking at Manga Studio and what's that all about. And it's also known as this other new name, right?
Yeah, Clip Studio Paint Pro is another name for it. And there's a long story behind all this, but yes. So Manga, just to preface this before we get into curveball, to preface this is that if you are tuning into this thing, we're going to have a hands-on demo probably in about 25 minutes, but we're going to front end it with some discussion on choosing different applications. And if you're new to Manga Studio Pro, this is the episode for you. If you haven't tried it out yet, and you've heard about people using it a lot, but you don't know what the big deal is about it, that's what we're going to explore today, and do some demonstration of some, like, 3 cool things that Manga Studio can do in the second half of the show. But first, we got curveball. So we do an intellectual warm-up exercise question without a pat answer, just to sort of chew on something for a little while to get our brains warmed up. And I've got one for you, Rob. Since we were talking about applications, we were talking about, like, different drawing tools, digital drawing tools. A lot of people are on different sides of the fence in terms of whether you should use pay tools or free tools, open source tools. And I've heard lots of arguments on either side. And like, when I hear people talking about, the arguments for using open source and free tools, is that, yeah, when you buy into an application, you're stuck in their ecosystem. Like, I've been using Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and the Adobe Suite for, oh my gosh, 20 years now, And there's a really nice thing that happens when you use something for a long time. You get really used to it, and you get really proficient in it. But then I am subject to whatever Adobe decides to do with the application down the road, if I want to stay up to date on what's happening with it, or stay up to date on, like, what's industry standard and whatnot. So, question for you, Rob: free or buy-in ecosystem? Where does Rob Stenzinger stand on this, and why?
The free.
You have to choose one.
Framing it, yeah, exactly. So I was going to bust the or. and then we can just look around and see what happens. It is a tough question. I think it's a matter of what is your situation. So are you learning and or teaching how to use some digital painting, digital creation tools, and in what situation? So if you're in a nonprofit and you're looking to explore the capabilities of digital lettering, or how to scan in and then do digital inking and what have you, there's so many kinds of workflows and possibilities and products that open up once you get into the digital world, and it actually the hurdle isn't that high from a monetary perspective if you stay with open, right? So in that situation, I think it would make more sense, especially if you're in any kind of cost-sensitive situation where this isn't like 1999 or 2001 anymore. Like, really, you can have from the ground up, complete free ecosystem that you work within, and not feel unserved or a giant gap in what you could pull off, because you have first class vector art tools and things like it just escaped me. I'm gonna have to look for that. And you have first class vector art tools, and you do have raster art tools as well, and things like Inkscape is the vector tool of
Oh.
choice. And then there's also which actually a lot of game artists will use Inkscape to author the position of objects and levels and whatnot too. And there's even kits that help you import that into game engines and whatnot. It's a really powerful tool, and is essentially not an exact equivalent to Adobe Illustrator, but it's super capable and precise to do serious work. There's a lot of competing products in that whole ecosystem that are meant to serve people that are inclined to just work within available free tools.
Didn't you go through a period years ago where you were trying to do everything open source,
Mhm.
freeware, like
Yeah,
even running Linux?
I did. It was where I lived and worked until or before I went to OS 10 for about, I don't know, was it 18 months or so, something like that. And it was right around 2007, and was it around the Gutsy era of Ubuntu, Gutsy Gibbon, or somewhere in there, Hardy Heron. I don't know, like they've they have their alliterative animal names for the versions, which is awesome. And yeah, I went whole hog straight from the Windows world, and that's what actually when I initially left a corporate gig, and I was very Windows centric in my career and all that stuff, and I started to just be interested in like some of the things that were happening in this unencumbered world of free software. And it's kind of amazing what this thing happened to me when I started to. I would look through the repositories, and I'm like, I can install any of this, and it's legal and free. And they like my intention to use it is completely and not pay for it is well met with the intention of whoever made it and shared it. And that just felt great. And there's this it was an amazing feeling of platform freedom, which it's like I could combine these tools and do anything I want. I could send out the people feedback. I could go and gut them and change them. I could do anything I want. Freedom, right? And but after a while, I started to as I was shifting what I was giving service in, I was getting clients and whatnot. And I did run into that friction of from the world of the paid software where everyone wanted their files in a certain format, understandably, right? I mean, I was also from that world not that long prior, and I ran into that often enough, and some difficulties with it where I still wasn't even as strong in the free tools as I was in the non-free tools because of how many years I'd practiced them, things like Photoshop and Illustrator specifically. And then so I ended up going back, and I went into OS 10 and what have you. And I've ever since I've kept a foot on both sides. I maintain an Ubuntu machine. No, this one is Linux Mint, but had been Ubuntu for quite some time. Because I fell in love with that world. I don't want to just completely dismiss it. And anyway, as far as if like which ecosystem is right or what have you, there's different specialties. Like there's fundamental different incentives why people provide capabilities in the free world versus the paid world, and the sort of mass of minds and human effort going into those different tools. By and large, the paid tools still have more time and attention that are put into them because they're in these ecosystems that have incentive to do that because they're paying people to spend so much of their waking hours professionally to make that tool better and what have you. And of course, that's this feedback loop of like, in order to maintain that ecosystem, it competes with itself and with the free model where it has to keep changing somehow. However, they don't live in a bubble. Like they don't live isolated. They actually inform and affect one another. For instance, the latest Photoshop, Creative Cloud, so CC 2014 or what have you, it actually has So it's had a JavaScript engine baked into it for a few years now for automation, and I've done some experiments with that both in Photoshop and Illustrator, mostly surrounding getting game assets in and out, and resizing them to different formats, whatever. But they actually baked in a deeper capability with this thing called Node.js in Photoshop, and so you can literally have this ghost Photoshop in a way running behind the front Photoshop that you see and interact with, and you can make these scripts that can just pretty much run and do anything in the UI, and they provide a ton of great examples with it as well. And anyway, so the Node.js, where does that come from? Well, that comes from actually Google's web browser Chrome has this engine in it called V8 that runs JavaScript that's open, that some other group of people used to make like web server capabilities with. Because normally you make JavaScript stuff and it runs in a browser, people click on it and whatever, but and it might talk to a web server, but it's not a server. And the Node.js people said, why can't it also be the server? And all of a sudden, guess what? jQuery, you know how to get around and making stuff happen in JavaScript. You can make even bigger. There's a whole other world open to you now as far as making server-side stuff run in JavaScript. Anyway, totally not like different worlds like happening outside of Adobe. And all of a sudden, like why Adobe's embracing this, right? Because these worlds aren't mutually exclusive. They can completely benefit one another, and so that's where I have been living for some time, and I see more and more companies embracing that too, and it's really fun to see. So, did that answer your question?
You said both, basically.
I've super emphatically said both. You said I couldn't say it. You said. So I said everything but that until just now.
Well, I think it's important to underline. I mean, if people listening to that got nothing else, then what they should have got is it's not a clear-cut answer, and it's not an either-or situation, right? It's not it's not simply just a political act of, well, you can't be giving to the corporate machine, you can't be giving to the corporate Adobe giant. You got to break free of them. There's advantages to being there, and there's advantages to being out of there. And you can do both, and you have that opportunity to do both, right? Mm-hmm. And it should be based on what your resources are and what your needs are, right?
Completely. Yeah. I mean, you may find that you can make do and work around some features and capabilities that may be in an expensive app, or you may find that company has changed their model where maybe you don't have to own the app forever. Maybe you can just use it for a month, and all of a sudden you paid $15 to help you land a gig there where you made way more than $15, and that kind of thing, where you just rent Photoshop for a month effectively, right? I mean,
that's true. I never thought of it that way. Like, I remember a lot of people got pretty riled up about Photoshop turning into the subscription model, but that means that you get just to dip in and dip out as needed if you're comfortable using some other software, but like for this particular job you need Photoshop. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. That's good. Okay, I think we walked around that one, Rob. Cool. I knew the answer you were going to give me. It's just I think it's a fun. I love the way you break it down. I love the way you break it down, and you refuse to be cornered into giving an either-or answer. So do you want to get to main topic?
I would love. I cannot wait. I'm a lapsed Manga Studio user. Let's go for it.
All right. Well then, I was gonna. Well, let's do 10,000 feet up. Discussing the topic in abstract, looking at it from every conceivable angle. Why? The big whys of using different kinds of software, particularly Manga Studio. So why use Manga Studio after all, and maybe pick at the process enough to come up with some kind of rubric for deciding what new softwares to take on, right? Because why even? I mean, if you're comfortable with something, why take time out of your busy schedule to learn something new? And just to frame this up a little bit, I've been using Manga Studio a lot over the last year. As a matter of fact, this book that comes out at the time of this recording comes out next Tuesday. So that's the 16th of September 2014, the Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation into the Kennedy assassination, which is a graphic novel about the Kennedy assassination and the report that was made about it. And I can find some of the art that I collaborated with Ernie Cologne and Dan Mishkin on this. And a lot of the buildings and backgrounds that are drawn in the book were drawn by me, primarily in Manga Studio. So yeah, anything that's inorganic, I think I drew in Manga Studio. So like scenes, these flashback scenes that take place in a suburban town.
Hmm.
So you know, probably 90% of the pages in the book had backgrounds inked in Manga Studio, and I use it for Captain Seriously and the Supermaster Sentinels. I just finished my 6th issue of that for the Seriously organization in Chelsea, Michigan. Every one of those has been done with Manga Studio. I'm trying to think what else I've drawn with that. Most of my freelance stuff I do nowadays, I do in Manga Studio. I really feel like it's replacing Photoshop for in a lot of ways for me. I mean, I don't even. The only reason I go into Photoshop now is because my production assistant flats in Photoshop, and now I want to train her into doing it in Manga Studio because I don't really feel a need to switch back and forth anymore. And then, as I said in the second half of the show, we'll explore these cool things that Manga Studio does to show why I feel like I can make the leap. Um, Also, the front end, it's way less expensive than Photoshop. I mean, it's what, $30 to get Manga Studio 5 or Clip Studio Paint?
Um, I think that's the upgrade price.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, but
Okay.
at the same time, I mean, brand new. What it's really funny, I noticed today, which I mean, we are not sponsored by
Good
Smith Micro
disclaimer.
or
Yeah.
yeah, or the other company that's involved in that, which is Celsius, the folks that actually wrote the software in Japan. But actually, Byron Wilkins, he tweeted a link where it's on sale again. It goes on sale kind of often, in my opinion, like a few times a year, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah. Anyway, it's yeah, it's on sale again, and they have, let's see, the um, getting into the baseline. It's without upgrade price, it's $48 basically.
Compare that to whatever a full license version of Photoshop. I don't know what is it? I don't know what the monthly fee is for the Creative Cloud version,
It
but
depends on how many apps you want to license.
okay,
If you want the whole suite, right, it's I think 50, but you can get it for 30 on sale, depending sometimes.
a month.
A month. Yep,
Yeah.
a month.
So that can get pretty expensive pretty fast. And if you are a visual storyteller who's just trying to get their feet wet into doing freelance illustration or getting a job in some kind of agency, that's a lot of front end expense to put on, right? And let me say this: if you're going to use pay software, at least for me, I am a big proponent of paying for your own software. I mean, I can't stop anybody from doing whatever they want to do, but all the software on my computer is paid for because the developers deserve to get the money for all the hard work that they do.
I mean, yeah, I mean, as am I, not to take some, some kind of preachy stance on it. It's partially a safety stance as well, where yeah, I mean, there are less. You're kind of breaking out an ecosystem in how software is, where you can guarantee that, oh, the person that wrote this is is the last person who affected this thing that I'm putting on my machine. And they do that by signatures and digital signatures that can cryptographically verify the ownership of a thing. And when you break out of that ecosystem, now you don't know anyway. So you're just you just don't know where that came from.
Right, right. So it is a safety thing as well as
Yeah.
just like it's a good thing to support people who make things. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so okay, so this is really going to be geared towards people who have never tried Manga Studio before, but have heard about it and are a little bit curious. But I'm hoping we can just very quickly, Rob, walk through the thinking process that we go through in whether or not we try out a new tool. Right? What are the reasons? Why
Mm-hmm.
do it? Because, like I said, if you already know something and you're comfortable with something, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of like going through the cost-benefit analysis of time spent to learn a new thing. Come on, brainy Smurf, do we have to be learning all the time? Well, if you listen to this show, yes. But is that reason enough? Is it reason enough to say, well, learning is good, so you should learn every new software that comes out?
Well, I mean, this is a specialized tool, so it does put it in a category of where you you can be using something that can completely solve and serve the purpose of creating comics, yet something like Clip Studio Paint or Manga Studio it's specialized, and that makes it a kind of exotic curiosity where it's like, hey, I care about making this particular kind of thing, and if I'm feeling like, you know what, I you know I want to treat myself, or I want to like it seems like it's in that realm of like the the give it a shot budget, where I call it idiot tax, where if I really blow some, well, like I really waste some money, and or like I have something that I break or whatever. I mean, I try not to just be cavalier about it, and it hurts if I paid idiot tax on a thing, but it's in that range where if I'm curious enough and I want to learn, I and that's how I looked at it, and eventually took the leap, mostly for that, because uh, so what could fuel that curiosity? Just the fact that it exists, and you're like, oh, they're talking to me. It's all about comics. But also there can be just, you hear about people that are willing to try it out. Like the Watchmen artist, Dave Gibbons, right?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's in the Manga Studio.
Wow. See,
And
yeah, that's another thing is like when you start hearing more and more artists you admire
and this
who,
is from years back too. Like,
yeah.
been a while.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So,
I
it gets on your radar, and you're like, hey, they use that brand of thing. I'm curious.
well, yeah, I mean that's why celebrity endorsements work, right? But also, like friend endorsements. Like the reason I first gave it a shot was years ago. Stephen McCraney, who's been on the LIA Cast before, he did an episode with us several months ago.
Hmm?
He was demoing Manga Studio on my Comics Are Great show, and he just showed me a few things that it could do, and I was like, whoa, that's interesting. I think I need to look at this a little bit more closely. And what made it stick was when he said, "Oh, this feels like the first drawing application that was really designed for people who make comics." I was like, "Okay, there you go. Now I've got the log line. Now you're talking about specialization. It's super specialized, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, you know, also finding a unique tool to solve a unique problem, right? Photoshop is great, but it was never specifically designed for comics. It was designed to solve a lot of problems, and you can make really awesome comics in Photoshop. I'm not slagging Photoshop here. I'm just saying that that wasn't its original intent. And it raises the question for me when you say this was designed for people who make comics, how did they address the problems that I face in illustration, right? If they're specifically thinking about the problems that I'm facing that a photographer is not facing, that a video editor is not facing, that an animation person is not facing, that specifically me, how did they address those problems? That creates a whole new realm of intrigue and new, like, well, in user experience design, I mean, that's what you're thinking about all the time, right, Rob?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, because so what it also means is that it has this mystery to explore, where somehow, like if if you're thinking about this specialized group of people has been providing feedback and putting this thing through its paces. Did they make something amazing, right? Did they make something that will make this task easier or save me time? Anything. And chances are, I mean, if it's a successful app, it's like, well, yeah, they're around for a few years. There must be something to it, you know. There's so yeah, that's another reason to be curious. It's almost like fortified with other people of your interests.
Okay, now follow up. When you start hearing about it, then it becomes time to, like you talked about paying an idiot tax. Like, or do you just go like, oh, I'm going to go to the Smith microsite, just buy the download and start messing around? I don't understand how this works. Well, I guess I'll have to figure it out. Or do you perform any other kind of research? Because for me, I start going around to trusted blog sources and then doing lots of searching to see what people are saying about it and see if I can find any demos of it. And I will, I'll say this: there's lots of resources online on how to use Manga Studio. As a matter of fact, who is it who has that great series of? He wrote the Manga Studio for Dummies. Oh, I thought I had it in my notes. We'll link to it in the show notes. But he has a whole series of videos on how to do all the different things in Manga Studio. But then I just wanted to see like artists using it for the different kinds of art that they do, because I was just one guy. I wanted to get lots of different takes. Not
Yep.
the easiest thing in the world to find like a lot of really great high quality videos on people using the software to give you a sense of how it works. So you got to do a lot of I had to do a lot of reading of blog posts and sort of taking people's word for it. And I came across Jonathan Case's blog where he was talking about the Surface Pro and how it like changed his life when he started using Manga Studio on it for like professional comics illustration for DC Comics. And then that was like, okay, I better just buy this software so I can find out more because I'm seeing the results. But I'm wondering what your research process is for, like, you hear about a different kind of software. What's the next step? What's the research process for you, or is there any?
Well, it's trials. That's a huge thing. Is if you
Yeah.
can do a free trial. And it was funny, like it's a combination of like a timed out free trial. It's a weird thing for me because my machine has been littered from time to time with expired trials because I get curious, I try a thing, and it's low risk to give it a shot, but then I didn't have enough time to follow through and get past the newness and actually solve real problems with it. So I kept waiting for Manga Studio until I had a little bit of time to do that research, and then I tried the sample and was sold, jumped on it when it was on sale. So I was trying to find a way to lower the risk where I was familiar enough. So I'm like, okay, I don't fully feel productive in this tool yet, but it's not totally scary. At this point, I'm willing to give it and I think I found it on a sale where so I jumped in on Manga Studio 4, and it was maybe it was 20 or 30 bucks back then, a few years ago. I did actually an episode of the Polytechnicast after I got into Manga Studio, and then I became a lapsed user. But for me, I took that risk and then said I need to use this on a project and just burn the ships for this project where that's it. I landed on Manga Studio Island, not leaving until I can make my own boat out of Manga Studio, and then we'll see. And it was the 24-hour comic day, I think, in 2011, when I said, "That's it. I'm using this thing."
That's exactly what I did too. So like it was issue 2 of Captain Seriously, the Supermaster Sentinels. And like the first one I did was a coloring book for them, and I did that all with brush pen. And the second one, they're like, well, now we want a full color comic. I'm like, all right, I kind of feel like I know how the interface works on this, but there's no better way to learn it than to force myself to live with it for several weeks. Mm-hmm. And so, first time digital inking, and I'm not going to say that the first pages were the best looking pages I've ever done in my entire life, but by the time I was done with that book, I feel like, okay, I have a working knowledge of it now, right? Mm-hmm. So using it for on-the-job training is my preferred way to learn a new thing, right?
It certainly clarifies matters.
Yeah.
Because you need to get somewhere, and there's a clear goal and a commitment, and you essentially pick that as one of your resources to deliver on that commitment, which, if you've done a little bit of dabbling ahead of time, it's not that cavalier. It's certainly aggressive, but it's also it's immersive in a way where you're like saying, that's it, I'm going to soak in it, and I trust it just enough to go for it. So
okay, that was the last point I want to hit before we get to on the ground. How do you know when you trust it? Are there way markers that you look for in, okay, this is trustworthy enough? Because I've downloaded trials of things, and I've tried out different free software, and upon opening up, I'm like, nope, I'm not spending another second in this application. I know for a fact that I am not, or I open up and I'm like, ooh, this is going to take a lot more time than I have to investigate any further because the interface is such and such, right?
Yeah, that is interesting. There's tools definitely that I left on my shelf and I've never picked up, even though I've got familiar enough to be like, I kind of get which problem I could solve with that. Recently, I put an app called Macaw through its paces, and I've jumped in deeply with it, and I love it. But that's for a separate whole domain. But as far as what happens, it's a series of small commitments. And so with Manga Studio, it was what sort of it's a what is your comics workflow, and what portions of it do you feel you can accomplish with that tool? And so I started to go through with it, and it started out with can I draw in this thing, and do I like how it turns out, and then became like, can I arrange panels, and until I eventually I made a page, and I felt like, and literally I made that one, not really, it wasn't actually for a project at the time. It was totally a test baloney page that I played with. But I'm like, well, this is now the unit of work that I know I can get through, and I did it in little increments, and anywhere along that way. If I was stuck, I was in. So this is another key thing. When I'm stuck, can I get unstuck reasonably fast? Reasonably soon, because of course it's new. I'm going to get stuck a lot, and can I get unstuck? And if I
Yeah,
couldn't, then that's a red flag.
and I like this idea of limiting the risk early on. Like with the first Captain Seriously book I inked in Manga Studio, I penciled on paper full pencils
Hmm.
to diminish that risk. So like, okay, I know I can ink from really tight pencils on paper. I can at least just do that. And then the later books, I was doing more and more inks or pencils digitally and using looser pencils to work from towards the inks, right?
Hmm.
So and that came with as I got more comfortable with each tool set. So like starting off with some kind of like limited part of your workflow for it to replace, I think is a really great way to keep the new software, new application, new tool from getting in your way.
Ooh, you reminded me of a term that I love from the Critical Path podcast that Horace Dediu mentions. He and I may be butchering his phrase, but it's essentially, what's the job you're hiring the tool for? And so it's kind of like, well, day one when you hire the new tool, you don't give it the keys to everything,
Yeah,
and slowly but surely it gains more and more trust.
that's great. All right, anything else that we need to throw on the front end of this before we dive into demoing the three awesome things that Manga Studio can do?
No, I do think it's worth mentioning that just to take a quick pause about using it on a tablet,
Oh
because
yeah, thank you.
yeah, back in 2011, I was one of my main workstations was a mod book, right? So I was
Mhm.
actually using it on a tablet of sorts, a beloved, super heavy tablet,
Yeah.
but a tablet nonetheless, and that was pretty magical, right? But now, fast forward a few years, you're using it on a tablet.
Yeah, okay, so I haven't talked about this whole lot because I'm still like I'm in my 30-day window of returnability on it. And I was kind of waiting until like if I get to day 30 and I don't return it, okay, I'm all in. But I got a Surface Pro. I got the Surface Pro 2, and so it's one version back. So it's the 16 by 9 Microsoft tablet slash laptop hybrid, however they're marketing that thing. But it's a tablet that you can draw on and you can run desktop class apps. And one of the things I was very impressed by after loading up a whole bunch of different art applications is Manga Studio in particular really did a terrific job of handling the mobile interface, or the tablet interface, I should say, because it's the exact same app that's on my Mac, on my desktop Mac, but they added functionality where it says, oh, I'm on a tablet now, so I'm going to add pinch to zoom, I'm going to add pinch to rotate, I'm going to arrange the menus in such a way so that they're all collapsible so they can get as much out of your way as possible, and even to where you can hide the menu bar altogether, and the menu bar gets compressed into this little arrangement of squares in the corner, so you can like sort of expand them as you need them. So I'm finding that I can do 99% of my work in Manga Studio without the need of a keyboard at all. I mean, yes, key commands would be great for certain things, but you can do most of it with just like a quick little tap. So I'm trying to see how much of it I can do without using a keyboard altogether. Obviously, lettering, can't do that without some kind of a keyboard. But it is wonderful to draw in this application on a tablet. Now let me say this. Okay, so I got a Surface Pro 2. I want to throw this out because somebody's going to be going like, "Oh, nice work if you can get it drozed." If you go to the Gazelle eBay store,
Hmm.
Gazelle is this company that refurbishes old electronics equipment. So like when a new iPhone comes out, somebody can sell their old iPhone to them, get a little bit of money back on it, and then Gazelle refurbishes the iPhone and then sells it in their eBay store for a substantial discount. So you can get like say like the Galaxy Note 10.1 that Rob and I talked about a while back on the show. Um, I paid $500 for that thing. It's on the Gazelle eBay store for under $200 now.
Mm.
So you can get these things at some steep discounts, and they're just refurbished and used. And if you get it in, they have like a condition rating from like good or fine, good, and very good and mint. I've never seen a mint item on there, but very good items are pretty close to mint. I bought a couple things from there, and I got the Surface Pro 2 with 8 gigs of RAM in it for a lot less than what you'd pay retail. So if you're thinking, oh gosh, this is way out of my price range, this tablet talk is nonsense, they're more affordable than you think. You can get a Surface Pro 1 for under $400 now in the Gazelle store. Granted, it only has 4 gigs of RAM in it, but I mean, as an entry device to start drawing in desktop applications on the screen, it's pretty great. So you just go to eBay and search for Gazelle, Gazelle, and you'll find their store. They got a whole subsection of tablets in there. Why are you shaking your head, Rob?
No, it just sounds awesome. I'm just gonna work out some budgeting because I miss that. I miss having the magical intersection. So I do love my Galaxy Note 10.1. What it's missing are the desktop class applications. It has amazing applications, no doubt.
Layer Paint HD is fantastic, but
which Paint HD?
Layer Paint HD.
I talked over you. Okay, cool. Layer Paint, yeah. And still magical, honestly. Like I went back to it. I was experimenting drawing on my iPad again, and I just the feel of that darn Galaxy Note's magical. Combine that with a desktop tool, there's a
forget about it. It's a no-brainer. It's incredible. And what I wind up doing is I pencil on my Galaxy Note now, and then I take those pencils to ink on the Surface Pro. And as a matter of fact, I've got some reviews on the way actually Layer Paint HD. I think its line smoothing is a little bit superior to Manga Studios, and I can't pin down why, but I feel like I get like more natural, better lines when I'm penciling in Layer Paint than when I'm inking in Manga Studio. Now when I'm inking in Manga Studio, I'm not using line stabilization as much, so it doesn't matter. But Layer Paint HD's line stabilization that I use in penciling is pretty good. So I'm going to be doing that for the foreseeable future, is continue to pencil in Layer Paint HD. But yeah, between the two, yeah, it's pretty great. It's great to like the reason I made this jump was I was at the coffee shop and I was penciling a RoboForce page, and then I was like, oh, I got to go home because I got to start inking this now, and I can't ink this here. And I was like, if only I could just switch to inking right now, And I know that's like what they call first world problems, but it's nice to get out of the studio, And if I had the money that I could afford to get, a used device, and I did. So, but
and it really is. And anyway, working, drawing directly on the screen, all that stuff, and then that amount of portability, desktop class, that's kind of it's an interesting sweet spot.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure that we visited it and I don't know, danced around it with happiness before we move on to the.
Yeah, and I'm going to practice streaming some videos from it too, which I may do just for the Patreon supporters to start out with, because I don't know how it's going to go yet. Because like I said, I've only had it for a few weeks. I haven't had a chance to run it through all of its paces, but if I can get it to work, I want to do it, and I want to share my results. So with that, how about we go on the ground? So we spent all this time talking about the whys. Now it's time to talk about the hows. Time to talk about like putting this stuff into practice. Manga Studio, how does it work? Let's see this thing in action. What are the 3 things that Manga Studio can do that impressed me at any rate? There's 3 things that I feel like is like, oh, now I get it. Now the app, I need to use this application a lot. Where do you want to start, Rob?
You know what? Seriously, number 1 might be so magical. It's like the ad starting at the ending of the story. But let's do it. Let's do it. All
right, I'm going to pull up my screen. So I've got up on the screen, for those listening in the audio after the fact, A little page of pencils of Boulder and Fleet from my upcoming webcomic, Boulder and Fleet Adventures for Hire. And this was penciled in layer paint, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it was. So you can see that it's like loose sketches. And one of the big ones for me about Manga Studio that makes it really, really freaking great, and let me go to just like a regular pen, is you can do vector and raster drawing in the same application. And I know you can do this with a lot of different kinds of, you can do raster drawing and vector drawing in Adobe Illustrator, but a lot of people, including myself, find drawing in Adobe Illustrator to be a little bit of a head scratcher. And though I've talked with artists who work exclusively in Adobe Illustrator and have no problem with it, I still find it impenetrable. I love using it for lettering, but not for drawing. So, but Manga Studio lets you do vector drawing that feels absolutely natural. So I just drew this ink line. And there's going to be a little bit of delay because my machine is struggling with streaming and drawing at the same time. And this line looks like an ink line. But when I go to, say, the control point selector, I hover over it, and can you see this, Rob? Do you see
Oh
these?
yeah.
The Bezier points show up. So suddenly this line is editable the way a line is in Adobe Illustrator. Yet I can
Yeah.
ink naturally with it.
Yeah, it's like the heart of the line is just a path.
Yep, just a vector path.
Mm-hmm.
And this has some serious, interesting ramifications for drawing. So, for instance, this is the trick that Stephen McCraney taught me that made me go, oh, I got to get this application. Is you can do what's called vector erasing. So let's say, let me actually undo this, and I'll try to do something that feels. Well, actually, I can just clear the whole layer. Let's say I'm drawing Charlie Brown, and it's going to be a little wobbly because again, my computer's having a hard time catching up with. You're making me stream video and draw at the same time? That's no fun. Oh. Let me undo that. I'm going to try it one more time. I'll try to do it faster. Come on, computer. All right, clear that layer. I'll try to do a fast circle. There we go. And it's a very oblongish shaped head. But let's say I draw an ear on this guy's head. And I'm like, oh no, I crossed over the line. Now I'm going to have to go in. I'm going to have to erase that, bit by bit up to the line of intersection, right?
Mm-hmm.
With vector eraser, it'll just erase the line up to the point of intersection with another line.
That is nuts. How many settings did you have to do to tweak that?
I didn't have to do any. There was 0 settings to tweak.
Okay.
It's just it's one of the eraser settings naturally in Manga Studio. So you have hard eraser, which allows you to erase normally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like you would in Photoshop. You have soft eraser, block eraser, and then one of the settings is vector eraser, and you can set it to erase just the part it touches up to the point of intersection or the overall line. So it'll treat a line as an object and allow me to erase that whole thing.
Mm.
So suddenly you've got ink lines that you can treat as objects and paths at the same time. And that is freaking crazy. And here's where it gets crazier. This is where I got really excited. Is you can take even pencil lines. So here's like a grease pencil that I got. And I can draw an intersecting pencil line, and it treats both of these as a vector, so I can erase up to the point of intersection even on soft rasterized lines. And to the same degree, I can hover over those lines with the selection point tool, and I can modify the shape by just selecting the points and dragging them.
That's crazy powerful. How long did it take you as far as getting used to that? Because it's almost like a new piece of your vocabulary.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is and it isn't because I was used to working in Adobe Illustrator. So once I saw that, oh wait, these are paths too, then it became absolutely, second nature to modify those paths, right? Because I spent a lot of time messing with those paths when I was doing lettering in Adobe Illustrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't seem like it took a whole lot of extra learning because I already had a little bit of that vocabulary. But I'll show you a practical use for this. Like let's say for a second, I'm going to grab just like the pen tool. And let's say I'm inking Boulder here. And this will be interesting because of the lag, right? So it's like, oh no, I got that curve all wrong. Well, I guess it's time to hit undo and redraw the line, right? And I hope this doesn't sound too infomercially, but with
I was
this,
wondering if I should play the other infomercial guy.
oh no, Jersey, you have to redraw
Oh
the line.
no.
Not so, Nancy. But I can actually go in and adjust the curvature of these lines after the fact, or there's even another tool. There's a pinch vector line tool, which you can move move the whole line like that after the fact. You can change the amount of pinch level so that it only moves part of the line. You can change the amount of effect range that it has, so I can affect more of the line as I pinch it. But you can very intuitively move the line around as needed to adjust your curves. And when you're drawing something like RoboForce, where there's a lot of robots with a lot of smooth curves on them, this becomes very, very handy. Um, I mean, it can also be a rabbit hole. You can wind up getting lost in making changes to your thing. But if you set a timer and say, like, look, I got to have this thing done in an hour, um, then hopefully you won't get too lost. But then again, like, so now I can draw Boulder's ear very poorly, and I can draw his other ear. And I don't, this changed the way I draw because now I'm not worried about slowing down when I get to the point of intersection on a line. Like, because normally if I was inking on paper, I would slow down as I got closer to Boulder's head because I don't want the line to cross. I don't want to have to do any extra
Mhm.
editing. But with vector erasing, I can just draw with reckless abandon and just erase all the intersections with a touch.
That's it looks like a pretty big deal, honestly. That's the part that I think would take me a little bit of getting used to.
So yeah, uh,
So, but it's amazing, honestly. Now,
but
what about
yeah, go ahead.
so what about like other line characteristics? I mean, so you have the vector. You mentioned line stabilization. How does that work?
Oh, line stabilization. So, okay, so if you take, let me go back to just the G Pen tool because that doesn't take as much processing power. So down in the bottom left corner of the screen, and it might be a little small to see on your unless you full screen the video after the fact.
Hmm.
But you've got a bunch of different options. You got your brush size, you got your opacity. This is something they changed recently in Manga Studio 5. Is it used to be that you could draw in an ink line and just set your preview to either be aliased or anti-aliased. Now you have different degrees of anti-aliasing that you can set, right? So there's like a maximized anti-aliasing and then zero anti-aliasing. I don't know if, I hope these are showing up. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, which is kind of a bum out in a way because what I like to do is ink in anti-aliased lines and then switch it to non-anti-aliased lines for exporting so that I could flat it easily. But they're actually, again, like that was for Photoshop purposes, and I may never use Photoshop again after using this application to draw comics. So underneath anti-aliasing settings, you've got stabilization settings. So you can set zero stabilization on your line, and it will follow pretty accurately to what your hand does.
Hmm.
Or you can set, maximum stabilization, and it smooths your line. It interprets what you're doing, and it uh, stabilizes the line, gets rid of a lot of the wiggle and jitter on the line. And let me turn the anti-aliasing on a little bit so it looks a little bit better on the screen. Um, so if I draw a smoothish line, it's going, or a wobbly line, it's going to smooth it out a little bit. Let me turn
Hmm.
stabilization off and do the same thing. And there's
Okay.
like, it's very difficult to perceive, but there's like a little less jitter in the line. So if you're doing something with like a lot of swooshing curves, a lot of smooth contours, a little bit of stabilization can help you out a little bit. And then there's vector magnet, which I haven't played a whole lot with yet. But this is just like, for intro, getting people used to the notion of Manga
Hmm.
Studio, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, but the brushes, even the brushes that come packaged with this application, are the most natural feeling digital brushes I've ever used. Like it's the closest thing to drawing with real pens. Whoa, Boulder, you got a big mouth there. Um,
He looks very satisfied.
and you can make your own brushes, um, but if you want a quick solution just to jump in with using a lot of really cool custom brushes, Ray Frenden of Frenden.com, Frenden.com, he's got a whole passel of of different custom brushes that he's made, like watercolor brushes, chalk brushes, pencil, like different degrees. He's even got like here's like a blue pencil brush that he's got that when you zoom out, it looks like you're using a pencil on paper.
Wow.
Um, so he's got a lot of great brushes that are reasonably priced, and he runs sales all the time as well. So I went ahead and just bought a whole bunch of his brushes and imported them into Manga Studio for inking. I really really like his one of his newest brushes is one called Hairpin Sable, which has a lot of really great line value to it, where you can do like razor thin to pretty thick. I don't even know if you can even see the beginning of this line. It's so razor thin, but without adjusting a whole lot of settings, you can go from super thick to thin, which is more like using a Crow Quill pen for me. So he's got a lot of great brushes that, like right out of the box, you can start doing some pretty awesome inking with. And the only thing you have to remember, whether you're doing raster or vector inking, is it depends on the kind of layer. So there's down in the bottom right in your layers palette, you've got the option to create a new raster layer or a new vector layer, and you just choose either one of those. Now, in the last Lean Into Art cast, I think I was talking about something I was facing in terms of the way I color this Boulder and Fleet comic. You remember this, Rob?
Yeah.
And it came
And
out of the fact that, oh, go ahead if you want to.
no, go, yeah, frame it up.
Yeah, well, basically, I wanted to use these awesome Ray Frendon dry brushes to ink the Boulder and Fleet comic. And you can see on the screen right now, like that looks almost like it's on paper. It's really convincing dry brush. It looks fantastic. And my concern is that if I go and let's change layer types. I think I have this set already. Layer settings. Here we go. Turn that off. So if I go in, I can take my paint bucket tool and I'm going to change the color on it. I'm going to go to a layer below. I made a raster layer called flats, and you can set your paint bucket tool to refer to multiple layers, just like in Photoshop, right? So let me go back and make sure this line is opaque enough. Whoa, that's too big. Let's undo that and let's turn that brush size down just a touch. Okay, a little bit bigger than that. I'll try to close this shape as best I can. Okay, so let's say this is a closed shape I've got in my comic. And you can take the paint bucket tool and drop it in a layer below in Photoshop, and it will refer to all layers in the document, right? You know
Yep.
what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
And I could do that with this. So let's change my color to a nice bright color that we can see. Not too
Yeah,
bright.
I think it's a selection setting.
And yeah, it is. Well, in the paint bucket tool in the top bar, you can say refer to all
There's that
layers.
too.
And then
Yep.
if you got like a closed shape, but you're working on a layer below that shape, it'll still fill up to the edges of the shape above. Well, if I do that with this application, if I do that with this application with a soft raster line, you can see what happens, right? We get that weird pixelization that comes up where it's butting up on the very first gray pixels in the ink line. And I want the colors to go underneath the ink line. I want them to go to the center of the ink line. Well, a leaner emailed us after that discussion, and his name is Misha, Meisha, and he's at salon.io/Misha. Showed me this trick in Manga Studio to do fills with textured soft lines. So you go into your inks layer and you control click on it or right click on it. You go to layer settings and you set as reference layer. That's saying that this is a layer that you're going to be referring to with another layer. And then with your paint bucket tool in the settings, there's an option to choose multiple layers or choose your reference layer. So this fill bucket is now only going to refer to that reference layer no matter what layer I'm working on. And then there's a toggle switch here that says stop filling at center line of vector. Remember when I held that tool over top of the lines?
Mm-hmm.
You see that vector line there? So now when I take that paint bucket tool on the layer below and fill, it's going to fill all the way to the center vector line. It'll fill underneath the ink line. So I can just do paint bucket fills to color Boulder and Fleet even if I do use brush pens. this
And
thing.
now you had a closed shape before, where you did a few embellishments to add to that shape,
True.
right? To make it, and it's just that thinking in the realm of pixels, it seemed like the almost a line breaks as it gets closer to white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if, I mean, so you could have done that right as step two, where you could you have done that fill, even though due to pressure sensitivity, it looks like the line's breaking as it's simulating the pencil stroke, but then it's not actually broken because it's one continuous stroke, right?
Because it's a vector. That's right.
Exactly. So like
So like
so
yeah,
like you still could have filled that shape, right?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, like if you look right here, it's almost like it didn't fill in this area, and that line is almost invisible, right? It's just the softest gray there. But because it filled to the end of the vector, it stopped there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, this is
That
not going to be very good for audio, but
no, well, maybe it's the whole. I think anyone who's tried to fill in their artwork in Photoshop has dealt with that,
true.
um, and it's kind of wild because of that vector line. The vector is continuous. It creates that full barrier, that region of where that can get colored in. Um, Whereas it's not the pixel effects on top of the vector line.
Right. Yeah. So, and when we're done, I'm going to show the finished version of this page so people can see how it all comes together. But I just want to
Ooh,
get through a
nice.
few more of these. Was there anything else about the inking tools that we wanted to cover on this, Rob?
No, that was yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that was a super handy tip from Misha though, and
Yeah. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you for sending us that.
I mean that itself justifies why we do this show because I was facing a problem that I didn't know how to solve yet, and then just by voicing it, somebody said, "Hey, here's the thing." And Misha even sent me screen caps showing like where to toggle the things. Like, you're awesome. Thank you. Okay, so then number two, what's the second cool thing? The rulers in this application are crazy cool. So everybody, or a lot of people have heard that it's got perspective rulers. So you can create, right, like 1 point, 1, 2, 3 point perspective. And just to demo that real quick, I'm going to draw and actually, it changed in Manga Studio 5 from 4. If you're used to the way it worked in 4, it's a little different, but the more I used it, the more it made sense to me. And it actually feels like it's a pretty natural way of doing it. So here I've got my Boulder and Fleet's wagon that I've roughed in. I've approximated the perspective, but it's not in proper perspective. And then I'm just going to click and drag with the perspective ruler and match that line on the top of the wagon as best I can. And then I'll match the line on the bottom of the wagon as best I can. And now I've got a 1 point perspective. And if I go to my inks layer and try to draw, it's only going to let me draw in perspective. It will not let me draw out of that perspective from 1 point.
Mm. So it's just the those two lines create the reference for a vanishing point that's probably pretty far off the page
Yeah, I
actually.
mean, I can zoom out and you can see, well, it's probably hard to see on the video, but you can actually adjust the vanishing point after the fact. Like there's this, what is this tool called? This is the operation tool. And with it, I can adjust not only where the reference lines are, but I can
Mm.
adjust where the actual vanishing point is after the fact. I don't know if you can see that very well.
Yep, we can see the highlights moving around. And I imagine
Okay.
that there's probably like some sort of filled in line, even though it's like
Mhm.
going outside the entire drawing. That's the full page.
And when you're using the perspective tool, you have a couple different options. You can um, create the perspective tool on the layer that you're editing, so I could have it happen on my inks layer, or if you toggle that off, it creates a new layer, a perspective ruler layer that you can toggle on and off. So if I don't need to work in that perspective for this particular part, like let's say I want to start inking Boulder, and I'm like, oh no, it's only letting me draw in perspective, right?
Mhm.
That's a problem. So it won't let me draw on a curved line because it's making my line snap to that perspective. So I'll delete that, and I can just hide that ruler, and then I can go back to normal freehand inking, right? And
Yeah.
toggle it back on whenever I want to work in that perspective again. And so you can have perspective ruler layers for multiple different objects in your document, which is very handy. But let's go ahead and make another perspective ruler that's a 2 point or a 3 point. And I'll just hide my perspective ruler 1, go back to my perspective ruler tool, and all I got to do is, again, click and drag to match it to my first point on the wagon, second point on the wagon. Now I'm going to do perspective for the front of the wagon. And I click and drag, and there's my next ruler line, next ruler line. And if you zoom out and I use my operation tool, I can highlight, and you can see here's vanishing point number 2, here's vanishing point number 1, and then I can even create, as simple as clicking and dragging, create vanishing point number 3, and so on. And now it will not let me draw, again, going back to my inks layer, it will not let me draw outside of the perspective that I've assigned. Whoops, let's go that way. Is this making sense, what I'm doing here?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's actually I did an episode of the Polytechnicast with Jonathan Rector too, to get like some more advanced tips and whatnot on and this is one of the things that he talked about is and it was back on Manga Studio, I think, yep, EX4 or what have you. But yeah, conceptually the same thing. This has been a huge strength of the tool. And again, it's like who needs this? Well, people illustrating, and especially people illustrating comics.
And watch this. I'm doubling this up with the vector erasing, so I just delete all the intersecting lines.
Oh.
Right? Oops, I don't want to delete that one. And suddenly, perspective drawing becomes a lot more efficient. Right? I just cross over whatever lines I want and just erase where the intersections happen.
That's pretty amazing, honestly. And this sounds so infomercial. Again, we're not sponsored by.
We are not sponsored.
Anyone involved with this.
But if they want to give us some free copies to give away to the leaners, we'll take them.
Absolutely. Would love to join in a promotion because honestly, it's a pretty amazing tool, and I'm really stoked to get back into it with getting reacclimated here from these demos, Jersey.
So here's another thing they changed in Manga Studio 5 from 4EX that I found. So you have tools where you can make. I'm going to turn off my perspective tool just for a second, or perspective layer. You have like ellipse tools, right? And you have rectangle tools, straight line tools, where I can just draw straight lines. You turn on your perspective ruler, and turn back on that 3-point perspective, and I take the ellipse tool, it will not let me draw the ellipse outside of that perspective either. So if I go here,
what?
And there's my wagon wheel, and there's my other wagon wheel. And whenever I try to draw an ellipse, it's going to put it in the perspective that is on the screen. Yeah, that's pretty bonkers.
It is super bonkers. So I imagine it's sort of like you get a feel for as I'm watching you do this. You're probably dragging along a certain direction that Manga Studio decides, oh, you must mean along this vanishing point, as if you were doing your normal drawing.
That is exactly right.
And it just says, well, okay, whole shape, I'm going to put into that plane.
Yeah, okay. So the perspective tool is pretty great on its own, but there are a lot of rulers in this application to choose from. So let me go back to my ruler palette. You've got special ruler, figure ruler. Let's go to curve ruler real quick because this one really knocked my socks off. So and I use this for like freehand drawing as well as doing like the technical stuff I got to do on RoboForce. So let's say we got fleet here. Now, I mentioned earlier that in Layer Paint HD, I get really natural feeling lines through their line stabilization engine. But with Manga Studio, I may have a little bit more trouble. Let's say I have like some trouble getting the arc of fleets back just so. I'm like, God, I keep messing it up. I'm just going to keep undoing all day. Well, with the curve tool, or the curve ruler, you can set Bezier points like you do in Adobe Illustrator. And this creates like a custom editable French curve that with my operation tool I can go in and modify, and I'm making my own custom French curve here following my pencils. So it's still my drawing. I mean, some people may consider this cheap, but man, oh man, does it speed things up for me, because I don't have to do a million undos. Now when I draw, my line is going, ooh, hey Fleet, you got like some beautiful hair there. Let's turn the brush size down. Now when I draw, it's going to follow that line exactly, and I get exactly the curve I want for fleet. And with pressure sensitivity, I could just press harder for a thicker line and less for a thinner line. So it feels like a natural line. It's a little thickness there, see?
Mm.
But it won't let me draw outside of that shape. And then to get rid of it, I just use my operation tool, click on it, and then just hit delete or clear. And I've got exactly the arc of her back that I wanted, right? So that curve ruler comes in super handy for drawing really custom things in your or inking custom things in your illustration that you want to get exactly right. Um, Super
And
cool.
yeah, and I imagine that exactly. It's sort of that style thing where um, some artwork does call for that level of precision, and and if there's kind of a theme of what I'm seeing here, it's like there's affordances for speed for the kinds of things a comic illustrator runs into.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, and I'm not saying I use the curve ruler on everything. It's just like when I can't nail the line down, and I got to get it just such a way, or
Mhm.
like on the RoboForce comic where I'm drawing robots with like a lot of specific curves on them, and I need it to be just right. I mean, this is again, it's the same reason we use French curves when we're drawing on paper. Like when I was doing the front, which people can read online at thefront.me, there's a lot of French curve work in there because there's this crazy ship that shows up in chapter 5 that has a really funky shape to it with these funky curved wings. And it was all, mapping out the perspective by hand and then breaking out French curves to match the shapes to the perspective. This is speeding things up for me. Still using the same skill set. It's assisting you by saying, no, I'm not going to let you draw out of perspective. And that's what a French curve does, or with a ruler does when you're working on paper, right? You put the ruler there, you can't not draw straight when you run it on the ruler, right?
Sure, and that's it's a general way we're talking about whatever the concept of cheating, analog equivalence, and what have you. If that, yeah, I mean it's good to know if that's a concern. It's not like you've been teleported to an alien world where you just think of a comic and Manga Studio uh, etches it out for you. Um, what about other kinds of effects? Like I know that there's different rulers in there. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let me go back to the screen share. Um, so let's see, what are the ones we got in here? Oh, well, there's other rulers. Again, for people who have never used this before. So let's go back to those wagon wheels. Like, let's say I don't want to just do a black line circle for the wagon wheel. Well, there are special rulers, and you can do a concentric circle ruler, which you click and drag, and then you adjust it exactly how you want it. And then I don't know how much this is visible,
mm,
but with the operation tool, I can click and move it and adjust its width and so on. And then once again, it's not going to let me draw out of that circle, right?
yeah. So,
And so this way I could do like much more precise um, circles and ellipses in my illustrations. I mean, this tool is like indispensable when doing RoboForce because Max Zero has a whole mess of ellipses on him. So there's that, and then after the fact you can move it. Now, yeah, after the fact I can move it around. I can rotate the ruler and use it in a variety of ways, just like you would a French curve. Um, and you can delete it when you're done. But then there's also, let's go back to the special rulers. Another one I use a lot is the focus line ruler. So the focus line, you basically just click at what point you want it to be the center point of your ruler. And this is like I use this a lot for speed lines. And I'll show you what I mean. So there's this star here in the middle of the image now, and whenever I draw, all lines converge on that center point that I've defined. I can't not draw a line that's not converging on that. So if you're doing like a burst effect or speed lines, this thing is freaking great, right?
hmm Oh yeah, that tool's been around. Another one of those, yeah,
This
really,
one's been around since forever in Manga Studio. This is not a new one, but it's a useful one, a very useful one.
absolutely.
And so let's get rid of that one. And then there's also, you want to get fancy, there is uh, focus curve. where you do the same thing. You make a center point, and then you drag out another line. And with the operation tool, I can modify the curvature of this line. And what it does is I've created a curve, and I can do lines that fan out from that center point following that curve that I've defined.
Whoa.
Well, what's the practical application for this? If you're drawing, as I do a lot, a swooshing punch line, somebody's punching somebody, and like there's those swoosh lines following the path of their fist. You're also doing like a curved starburst effect. That can become exceedingly useful, and I've used it more than a few times in the RoboForce comic.
Yeah, so it looks like a handy way to visualize the flow of some kind of force or energy, any kind of effect.
And then there's like just simple things like parallel lines. I can set up a parallel line here, and I can't not draw lines on that axis. And then I can just change the orientation with the operation tool. And then when I try to draw again, it will only allow me to draw following that parallel line. So that comes in handy for like little tiny edits when you're working on a perspective piece, and it's like, oh well, like let's say for instance, like if I did the perspective on the wagon, and then I just wanted to do like, oh, the wagon arms that Boulder's pulling on here are at a slightly different angle, but I don't want to make a whole nother perspective ruler. I can just take this tool and go, well, let's just lay that right there on top of the wagon arm and just, and then adjust it if you want to do it. If you want to like be a little bit more hands-on about it, and then boom, right? And that gives me a natural line with a taper and everything, but it still follows a nice straight line. It's basically like holding a ruler on your paper, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a ruler that can emanate ghost rulers.
That's a good way of putting it. So that's like a quick little primer on using the different ruler tools, and there's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of them that you can mess around with, but those are like some of the big ones that have helped me out a lot. Any place else? Well, I want to see if we got any comments in the Google Hangout to see.
Good point.
See what anybody else has been saying about this. Well, Lucas Haig is here, and he says, laymen call it cheating, pros call it workload efficiency. Thank you. That's a great way of putting it. And Shadow Wingtronics is here saying there's also the close gap feature that will guess where the line should close. I use that a lot, but I scan in my art. Yeah, that he's talking about the fill tool in Manga Studio Pro. You can do that too, where it will guess where the gap should close. And then Joe Gillespie's in the chat. It says, I find it tough to get a feel for the page size digitally. Do you still do roughs at 100% in pencil and scan? This is a big one, especially working on the Surface Pro, where you really are dealing with a substantially smaller screen. It's, what is it? The Pro 2 is 10-something inches wide, but it's 16:9 aspect ratio, so it's a relatively narrow screen compared to something like an iPad. And if you spend a lot of time zoomed in on the stuff, you can lose track of what your proportions are on the drawing. And I've run into this with my penciling. I'll be penciling something, and I'll go in and I'll be drawing this hand, and it just looks great, and then I zoom out, and it's like, oh, the hand is completely at odds with the rest of the body in terms of proportion, right? So, what would you do about that, Rob, in that situation?
Well, I do like to work rough at a very large scale. So I may try to essentially create some boundaries, and then zoom in, because you end up running into that anytime you're drawing on a smaller screen. And I run into that when I use an external, traditional tablet when I'm working on my MacBook Air, or if or drawing on an iPad or the it's common, because unless you're working on a very large digital screen like a traditional Cintiq, then you would have less of a chance to run into that. So
I think that's a really good tip, though, is doing your roughs at 100%. So like when I'm penciling like RoboForce on my Galaxy Note, I do like almost like a marker rough, and I do it completely zoomed out. and just to get my proportions absolutely right. So then I know when I zoom in, I'm not going to lose track of that proportion as much. Um, but then there is the danger of when you get too close, like am I adding detail that'll get lost, right? And for that, I just make a habit out of zooming out and looking at it 100% as often, like every couple when I finish it, like a little tiny bit of it, zoom out, look at it again. Um,
That's
but
it.
another
That
thing you
is a
could do,
really good tip. Yep.
well, another thing you could do is like hook it up, if you have an external monitor to hook it up to, right? Hook it up to an external monitor, and then you can have it at 100% there while you're working too, right?
Oh gosh, that's something I've always had on a kind of a wish list radar, and I've seen. I don't know if it's Krishna Sadasivam, friend of the show. You've been on the podcast and all that a couple times actually. I think if I'm remembering correctly, and I've seen he'll do regular photos of his workspace and whatnot, and he will do essentially a portrait rotated monitor. And one of my favorite things is to have, like, when I've seen tips as far as how people will digital paint and whatnot and not lose track, is to at least have that sort of as your preview next to your main workspace. And
Yeah.
I think that's a great approach as well. But
Well,
it's
I
kind
mean,
of it's a luxury, right?
yeah, it is. It is a luxury. We're talking about nice work if you can get it material here, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's an external monitor. You can get those fairly relatively inexpensively, like 150 bucks, kind of
Hmm.
thing. And that's not a tiny amount of money. It's not insignificant, but
No, and it's so that again, it'd be worth thinking about how that would affect your workflow, and if you could sort of mock it up in any way possible before you jump into it, kind of thing. Just like adopting a tool like Manga Studio.
yep. All right, so we want to get to number three.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Number three, and I'm going to turn on this screen sharing again. So number three is the lettering in this thing. I did a workshop at leanitoart.com/workshops called FATAM, Sound Design in Adobe Illustrator. And I still stand by that workshop because I think that there's a lot of really good theory in there, whether you use Illustrator or whatever tool you want to use. It's 4 hours, so it's not just nitty-gritty stuff. It's also a lot of sound design theory. But in that workshop, I showed how I letter in Adobe Illustrator and import it into Photoshop. In Manga Studio, you can do vector lettering. Oh, and the reason why I use Illustrator is because it's vector, and you have a lot of wonderful editability of the sound files or the sound elements in Adobe Illustrator through like vector editing and editing the Bezier curves or whatever they're called. But lettering in Manga Studio is also vector. And so, again, you got that wonderful convergence of raster and vector. And they do this neat little thing with the way they handle the sound, or rather the words and the balloons. So I'm going to type some dialogue here. Hey, Boulder. And here's a little bit of dialogue from Fleet. And then the bottom left is where all of the, what is it called? The editability? What is it? The settings that I can tweak on this
Mhm.
appear. So I can change the font size, I can make it bold, italic, and so on. Change its orientation, whether it's center aligned or center justified or left justified. You can even change the text direction if you want to do vertical word balloons. So then I type my text, and I can move it around wherever I need it to go. But then, if I go back to my text tool, there's an ellipse balloon. And when I make a balloon, Manga Studio automatically, if you look in the layers palette, it automatically associates that balloon with that text. They are now the same layer. Even though with the operation tool, I can decide to move the balloon. You can let me do it? Oh, with the arrow tool, I can move the balloon. Or with the operation tool, I can alter just the width of the balloon. It doesn't affect the text at all. Text remains the same width, height, but I can alter like the width and height of the balloon to accommodate the text. Then I can even, come on, let me select the text. I'm going to change to what selectable objects I've got here. Text balloon, here we go. Okay, so then I can even select the text and move that around, or select the balloon and even select the Bezier points. I can modify my balloon the way I like to make them look hand done. Right? But it's all treated as one layer, which makes keeping your layers palette nice and tidy, right?
Now that part is sort of new, isn't it? I mean,
Yes, it is.
yeah, I remember that being sort of a like a they were paired somehow in the old Manga Studio, and it still is very handy, but it was more stuff to keep track of.
Yeah, there's less to keep track of in your layers palette now, and they're still paired, but they're paired in a layer in this really, I think, clever way, so that with the operation tool, I can select either one, or with the arrow tool, I can select both and move it around. And then I was showing you how I was modifying the Bezier points a moment ago. Another thing they introduced into Manga Studio with this pinch vector line tool, which I was using earlier to modify the lines on Boulder when I was adjusting the curve in his head, you can use this on the word balloon, and it's a more intuitive way rather than messing with points. You're just kind of pinching and squeezing it. And I found that this is actually a really nice way to make your balloons look hand done uh, without having to know anything about those Bezier points.
Yeah,
Uh,
it looks like a sculpting tool, you
yeah,
know?
it kind of
Like,
is. Yeah, it kind of is. And then if you go ahead and there's a tail tool, balloon tail tool here, and I can just click and drag, and it just adds it to the balloon, and then I can modify the Bezier points. And then I can even, with the control point tool, if I change the option on it to add control point, I can add a control point. This is right out of my workshop for TAM, and then I can select switch corner to give it a curved corner. Did I give it a curved corner? Let's see. Yep. And so now it's got a curved corner, so I can move my arrow and adjust it so that it's got a curved interior to the tail, and always make sure that it points generally towards the mouth. That's the thing you'd learn in that workshop. And boom, I've got a word balloon, and with the arrow tool, I can now move it wherever it needs to go. And if I want to change the ellipse a little bit, I can just go back to the pinch vector line tool and continue to edit to my heart's delight. And it will not affect the text. It's only affecting the balloon right now. If I want to affect the text, I go back to my operation tool and click on the text. I can move it around, stretch it, grow it, and so on.
so is there sort of a native way, like if you wanted to go fully by hand? Does it have affordances for that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. So let me make another one. I'm gonna grab my text tool again. Put a fleet word balloon, or for the dialogue rather, and let's put it over here. And then there is a balloon pen tool. So now with that text selected, or that text layer selected, I can go and this is gonna look really crummy because I've got a lot of lag going on. That looks awful. But let me try that again, and I'll just do it quickly. There we go. And you can hand draw your balloons, and you can even, I should have pointed this out, you can even adjust like what kind of brush shape is on the balloon. So like let's say I want to, and I haven't messed around with this too much on my own, but using the um, operation tool, I'll select it, and I can change the brush to a pencil brush that softens the line around the balloon. And I can do this after the fact. A spray line. It's got a lot of like silly ones in here that are just defaults, but I can do, yeah, there's hearts. Where's the dash line? You can do dash lines, so now he's telling a secret, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is treated as a vector object, so I can go ahead and modify this. Like even after I draw the balloon by hand, I can go ahead and change its shape by moving those Bezier points. Or if I don't want to mess around with that, I can just use the vector pinch tool and adjust it as needed. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
You can hand draw them. You can use, and then there's also the materials folder in Manga Studio, which has like some pre-made word balloons that you can use, and these are all in the tutorials you can find online. Let me see. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of pre-made balloons that you can just grab, right, and drop in, and then adjust their size. And So there's pre-designed ones, or you can make your own. I personally recommend making your own because it's going to make the comic feel more like your own comic. But you can use like the pre-designed templates to modify, right? And then if I take this balloon, you can make balloon first and then make text afterwards by going to your text tool, making sure you're on that balloon layer, and then just click inside of the balloon and hello, everybody, and center it. Bring the font size down, and then with the operation tool, I can shrink the box to match the text, and it doesn't stretch the text; it just keeps it centered in the box. Oops. Make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And that is, I was curious if we're going to mention, like, there are a lot of those sort of built-in palette tools as far as, depending on your interests and style choices, you could use more defaults. But I mean, obviously, this whole approach today seems like, looking at, even with the taking a very customized path, there's a lot of time savers.
Yeah. And here's the final page. And then the other cool thing that Manga Studio does that I didn't really get to go into is the way it automatically masks art that is within a panel folder. So you can make panel folders by simply using there's a whole bunch of panel tools in here, like pre-made panels, or you can set your square shape tool. Where did you go? Shape tool. Oh, there's a frame tool actually. So you can make a rectangle frame, and just by clicking and dragging your frame, it creates a mask. Creates a panel border, and then everything that's purple right now will not be seen by the audience, and anything I draw inside of this shape will be seen by the audience. So I'll hide that for now. And so all of this art exists in a panel mask like this. So you can see, like, when I highlight that panel, which is the whole page, everything around it turns purple. That's to indicate that no art that I draw outside of that area will be seen by the audience. And if I click off the panel, you'll see that the background just turns white. Now I'm in it, I'm in editing mode, and if I go to my lettering, this makes masking lettering so easy. So let's go to one of my balloons, and let's say I want it to be butt up right against the panel border and bleed off of the panel border just a little tiny bit. And it just masks it out automatically, because anything that crosses that line vanishes to the audience, right? Look at that. And so it makes managing lettering look a little bit easier because of the way the panels do that automatic masking. And so all the background here, I just painted right off into the distance. I didn't worry about like trying to keep it even up to the line or anything, because the mask takes care of it for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes it. Well, basically, you get to keep rolling, keep flowing, and because you're working inside that tool, that will mask it away, which it reminds me of just in general, that it's like Manga Studio, or Clip Studio Paint now has that that kind of mindset, if you will. And just knowing that, it's like it gives, like, I know when I get curious about how do I do something, like I'm getting curious once again to get reacclimated with Manga Studio, or Clip Studio Paint, I have this hunch that somehow there's going to be an affordance there for me to accomplish, laying out panels or what have you, or maybe if I played with my page layout and then did my pencils, I could, as long as I were working within one panel, I could be moving, really fast and not worry that I'm somehow sending art into another panel. Because in this case, you have one panel on this entire page, but you could have other panels and their artwork going outside their boundary, the border, and not affecting one another, which is pretty crazy handy.
Nathan Rackley's in the comments, and he says, "I have found the word balloon tool in Manga Studio to be particularly useful. With the way the vector manipulation on the word balloons handle in the program, I can finally make balloons that look like the ones I do freehand in traditional media." Yeah, I mean, a lot of my FATAM workshop that I was referring to earlier, the sound design workshop, was let's face it, it was a lot of workarounds to try to make something that is mathematically perfect look hand done. right? There's a lot of manipulation of the Bezier points and the ellipse that you create to make it look a little irregular. Whereas with this, because in Manga Studio you have the hand balloon tool, you can actually make it look like a hand balloon, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that we needed. Oh, what I wanted to show was I wanted to show finally here's like what the finished art looks like, and I'm hovering over and you can see all the vectors in the inking, even though this is really soft, brushy lines. See when I hover
Yeah,
over it that I
it
could
totally
go to
looks
any
like
one of these.
yep, soft brush or soft pencil with
Yeah.
or paper with a lot of tooth in it.
hmm
Yep.
And I can go ahead and just modify any of these lines, like just adjust curvature, right?
Hmm.
Or even, with my operation tool, I wonder if I could, well, I don't know if I can do it with that, but let's just say like I want to tweak just a little tiny thing. It's like, oh, the bottom of this R is just not right, right? It's just cool that I can do that, and it still looks like it was, drawn on paper. That blows my mind. And that's where this thing really started to come to like started to make sense to me. And then again, with that pinch vector tool, I can do it much more an intuitive way. Like if I draw it and I'm like, oh, the curve's just not exactly right. Whoop, just a little push, and it doesn't mangle the line in a way where like when you use the smudge tool in Photoshop, right?
Yeah, it's more spread out and gentle,
Yeah.
and
But it doesn't, because it's vector. It doesn't like spread the pixels, right?
right.
It tracks the pixels to the vector line that you're monkeying with. So yeah, I think that was all for demo because we are coming up towards the end of this. I mean, again,
Yeah.
if this piqued your interest, I think Doug Hills is the guy's name. Now that I think about it, Doug Hills is the guy who wrote the Manga Studio Guide for Dummies, and he did a whole bunch of video tutorials on like virtually every tool, and you can find them on the Smith Micro website. If you go to just do a search for Manga Studio 5, you'll find the Smith Micro website. They got all the video tutorials there. And that will go into great detail on like how to make word balloons, how to use tones in Manga Studio, how to use inks in Manga Studio, the difference between vector inking and raster inking. But this is just to give you like a taste of like three things that I found particularly useful. There's a ton more because like the painting engine in this thing has been vastly improved. So like you can do like really natural looking painting in it too. Um,
And
one
quick
thing,
question.
yes,
So are you saying so the coloring on this comic panel has was done in Manga Studio?
yes, I'll pull it
Okay.
back up.
Cool.
This
And
was
yeah,
drawn.
and as you were zoomed in, I mean, I mean, it looks very painterly with the sort of different brush regions, and you can see the brush strokes. You can, um,
Mhm.
yeah, just a lot of character, and texture because it's not just flat regions.
Right. Yeah, and this was again, these are Ray Frendon's brushes, which you can get at frendon.com. I really like them. But I mean, just the brush that comes stock with Manga Studio are pretty great too. So, but yeah, you can get some really nice. These are all just like these are all just dry brushes that I used. Like he's got a whole fleet of dry brushes that I purchased and played with. I just love that kind of textured effect you get on there.
Hmm.
So yes, it was penciled in Layer Paint HD, inked and colored and lettered in Manga Studio. So, and that was all done with the Surface Pro as well. This was one of my first test pages with the Surface Pro. So,
Hmm.
loving it. The question came up whenever I talk about this with people. They say, well, should I get Manga Studio 5 or Manga Studio 5 EX? Now, there's a comparison chart on the Smith Micro site, which we will link to in the show notes. As far as I can tell, the only major distinction between Manga Studio 5 and EX, and maybe some of the leaders can back me up or contradict me on this, is that EX has story mode, which is to say there's a file management tool in Manga Studio for EX that allows you to create a story file in which all of your inked pages are pre-paginated, right? So like you open up your story file and here's page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Whereas with in Photoshop, you don't have that, right? You just like you make a file, you save it in a folder. Here's page 1.psd, page 2.psd. Manga Studio 5 is more like that, more like Photoshop, where it's like you can save what's called an LIP file,
Mm-hmm.
right? Clip Studio file, I guess. You save all those files individually, but there's no story management tool. So if you are hooked on the story management tool, then you're going to want to get EX. If it doesn't matter to you, 5 has everything else that EX has. So you're losing one file management thing, I think.
Let's see. So I don't know if this made it through in the update, but there's one thing that I enjoyed in Manga Studio EX4 was essentially there's a script view in and so it was also a way to organize an entire book. It's almost like the unit of work could still be a page, but actually there was also a native unit of work that is essentially a book. And
right.
then one of the views on that book unit of work was a script where you could go through page by page and and so even ahead of time plan all the word balloons and work in sort of a text focused mode and workflow, and then sort of drag that out on the page pretty quickly, and then have your updates reflect back and forth from what I recall. But
as far as I can tell, that's not in 5. I think it might be in 5EX. So if you really
absolutely
like
that was part of the whole story focus of EX4. Yep. Cool.
But otherwise, that's the only major distinction between the two. So, to help people make that decision. But again, we'll link to it in the show notes at leanintoart.com. A link to that comparison chart so you can see for yourself and measure. The different. This is part of that research that we got to do in order to determine what software is right for us.
Quick comment on the idiot tax aspect of that. I mean, I think it's only a $6 tax. So if you end up changing your mind, you start on at least as of right now, from what I can tell in the upgrade pricing, you could upgrade one, or go to, Clip Studio Paint 5, Clip Studio Paint Pro, and not worry about the whole, story features, and then later upgrade, and like the delta between those two different, if you add up your cost, you'll pay like $6 extra, and which is probably worth it for the trust. Where if you're like, oh, I want to go even further into this tool, right? You'll pay $6 extra at this point, and I'm sure in the future it'll be a little bit more if it's off sale, but it's not that high of a tax to be, if you're still learning the tool, and it sounds like you're getting plenty of use out of Pro.
Lucas Haig is saying that EX has some more special rulers like symmetry. Lucas, I'm pretty sure that the symmetry ruler is in 5. I'm going to check real quick, but I'm going to load it up, and I'm going to go to my rulers tool, and there's, symmetrical ruler. Is that what you're talking about, Lucas? And that would be where I can draw, and it mirrors whatever I'm drawing on one side. See what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's like you have two brushes on the screen at once.
Yeah. If that's what you're talking about, Lucas, there it is in 5. But like Rob said, the idiot tax is not very high on this if you want to upgrade from 5 to 5EX, right? So.
Oh, let's see. Well, I mean, it's very interesting. Is there anything else as far as like any gotchas? Like, okay, so you're pretty far into it. So anything worth keeping in mind, or new mystery that you're hoping to solve?
Well, before I get to that, I before we lose track of it, Shadowing Tronics is in the comments, and he posted the link to the YouTube channel, the Manga Studio Guide channel. So thank you for that, Shadowing. And he's at bwspotlight.com. So any gotchas? I've been spending a lot of time with Manga Studio, but I have not spent a lot of time with it from the standpoint of doing 4-color printing with it. So the Captain Seriously books that I do the penciling, inking, and coloring in, that all went to print on demand, so I didn't have to worry about color settings as much. We sent them out as RGB pages, and it was no big deal. Now, with the Warren Commission report, this was four-color printed, but all the color was done in Photoshop, so I didn't have to deal with it there. I do not know yet how four-color separation works in Manga Studio, so that is one of the next hurdles I need to tackle. That's one of the big question marks for me, because if I use this to do my next graphic novel for a publisher, and if I do everything in Manga Studio Pro or Manga Studio or Clips, oh my God, these names, Clip Studio Paint Pro or Manga Studio 5, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
I am gonna have to figure out how to do four color, like CMYK color, and I know it's got those. I know the settings are in there. I just haven't had a chance to monkey with them yet.
And I mean, probably with some planning as far as your palette, you may be able to avoid some concerns, because essentially, overall, CMYK it's just a shifted palette with not as high of a range as RGB, and so well, I would imagine you could sort of plan that out to avoid some of those traps.
Yep, I'm sure, and we could always bring back Owen Jollins from his the episode that he did a couple episodes back. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a great one. He talked a lot about coloring comics. It's one of our better episodes. Oh, what episode was that anyway? 109. Yeah. But that's like the only gotchas that I can think of offhand, is I haven't had a chance to monkey with that too much yet.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. This was a pretty sweet demo, Jersey. I'm stoked to get into it, and then eventually get someday join you in the desktop class tablet realm again.
Yeah, budget permitting, right? Well, speaking of which, if people want to help the show, if you found this episode particularly useful, delightful, or entertaining, or some other positive feeling, a great way to let us know is to support us through Patreon, right? We've got a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/leanintoart, and we post these shows as well as the extra lean shows, the shows we do in between the shows there. We also do, I've been posting more of the Fabulous Secrets show, which the Patreon supporters get before anybody else. I mean, they're open to the public. Everybody can listen to them, but they're only on Patreon for a while before they hit the podcast stream. So, as little as $1 a month, you get access to all that stuff. And then there's a special Leaners only sort of open mic thread forum discussion group that happens on the Patreon page, but that's only for people who support us on Patreon. And then that would help make this show financially sustainable trade, as Rob likes to say. But if you can't afford that, let's say it's like $1 a month. I mean, I want to get one of those Surface Pro tablets. So hey, I need to save my pennies. Great free way to thank us or to support us is to go to iTunes, give us a star review, however many stars you think we deserve. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. That helps more people find the show, and maybe some of those people will support us on Patreon, right? So paying it forward by just spreading the word about the show. Anything else, Rob?
No, it's worth mentioning again the Warren Commission report, a graphic investigation. Yeah, is let's see, it's a good place to sort of get pre-ordered for that is indiebound.org, and do a search for it. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it's coming out September 16th. So just worth a re-mention of that.
Yep, comes out in paperback and hardcover, and it'd be cool if people went out and bought it and made it a New York Times bestseller, so then I can do more books. It's like somebody said to me, "It's like, oh, wouldn't it be great if it won some awards?" I'm like, that'd be cool, but it'd be really great if it just sold a lot of copies, so that the publisher will give me more opportunities to do more books that I like to do. But either way, I mean, it was an honor and a privilege to work on it, because I got to work with two of my childhood heroes, and I got to, take on a very interesting creative challenge, which we chronicled in an episode with Dan Mishkin a few episodes back. But yeah, it comes out this Tuesday. I'm going to be doing some touring. I'm going to be hitting a whole bunch of book signings in Michigan, and then this October I'm going to be in New York City for New York Comic Con and a book launch party at Bergen Street Comics in Brooklyn. Mostly doing signings and panel discussions. I'm not actually going to be tabling, but it'll be fun. If you're going to be in the New York area around New York Comic Con, it'd be awesome to high five you. And I said this on the Comics Are Great show. If you come cosplayed as Lyndon B. Johnson, I'll do an extra fancy sketch for you in the book.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, it's an excellent book, it was awesome to get a look at the galley version, and of course I have one pre-ordered at my local bookshop, so can't wait.
You're a good man, Rob Stenzinger.
Yeah, back at you, Jersey.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for downloading, watching, and listening. This will be archived at leanintoart.com, and I guess until next time, I have been Jersey Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jersey on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us. I'm gonna kill the stream.
Thank you. Lots of great questions, comments, super cool, links. Thanks a ton. That helps the show notes. It's awesome.
Yeah, it helps a lot, really. I mean, that's a huge help to us that you guys are keeping track of that stuff for us. So, all right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.